Okay. All right. So when it comes to the Yontiv of Shavuos, so the Yontiv itself is really just the Yontiv that's celebrating Yidishkeit. So it's a little bit open-ended in terms of what we can talk about preparing for Shavuos. So sometimes when it's so open-ended, it's easier. Sometimes it's harder. So let's talk about Yidishkeit. So there's a principle that it's already found in the Zohar Kodesh, and Chaim Vital in a couple of places references it and uses it. We'll talk about it. The truth is probably talk about it a little bit more in depth in some Shavuos night. But the Zohar Kodesh writes that every single halacha that you'll find in Shas, Shnayos, and so on, although it's obviously based on logic and based on rules and systems in place in halacha, but it's also being motivated by something in Pneumius. It's also being motivated by something in the world of the soul. And so that's the principle that Zohar Kodesh writes. Everything, all the masters of halacha, all the masters of Mishnayos and Gemara, were also masters of the secrets of Torah, and everything they said were always motivated on multiple levels. So let's take a particular halacha that we find in the halachas of Talmud Torah, the halachas of learning and how to educate children and give over Yiddishkeit to the next generation, and we'll see a piece of that topic in halacha, but then we'll see the pnimi. Hopefully, we'll try to understand the pnimis that's coming out of it, and it'll tell us a lot about Yiddishkeit b'chlal, which is what Shavuos is really about. Okay, so let's begin like this. We know that when it comes to, technically speaking, the way it's supposed to be technically is that education, the Torah is supposed to be given over parents to children in a family unit, in a family dynamic. That we know. That's the technical mitzvah of Talmud Torah, not just to learn, but to teach and to give it over to one's children. Now we know, and I've spoken about this on other occasions, that by the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, Yeshua ben Gamliel, one of the Kahanim Gedolim of the second Beis Hamikdash, saw that such a system is it's not working for everyone. First of all, you have to have parents that know how to teach. You have to have parents that have the experience and just the resources to do that. It's not for everyone. And so a system of yeshivas was set up. Every single city has to have in order for it to be a place that Jewish people live in, it has to have a cheder, it has to have a yeshiva set in order to educate the children of that particular place. But the truth is, even with that system in place of a yeshiva system and so on, of mass education, it's not replacing the family unit and the family dynamic. It's teachers and mowers and so on have to be seen as extensions, as messengers, as emissaries of the parents to educate the children. But ultimately, it still boils down to parents giving over Yiddishkeit to children. Now we're going to see a particular halacha when it comes to the technicalities of a yeshiva system. Again, I'm not going to say this is halacha l'maisa nowadays, but just the way the Rambam records it, so to speak, and you'll see where the previous comes from. Okay, so let's start learning. So Marmukah number 1 says a Gemara Kedushin. It's a Mishnah in Kedushin, in fact. It's all the way at the end of Maseches Kedushin. It's one short line. The Mishnah says it's talking about, again, the halachas of this yeshiva system, the yeshiva network that needs to be in place in the Jewish community to educate the children. So it says, so there's all sorts of rules and regulations. There's rules about how big a classroom has to be, what type of person the teacher has to be, how many teachers per student. There's a whole system. So the Mishnah says as follows: Adam Revek Seifrim. One of the stipulations in halacha is that a single person, a single man, someone that's single, not married, he should not be teaching young school children. Adam Revek Seifrim. That's the Mishnah in Kedushin. Now the reason for that, as we'll see soon, is because of tznius. It's because of tznius. The assumption is that you're dealing with little kids in yeshiva, mastama, dropping them off, picking them up. Sometimes it's going to be the father, but very often it's going to be the mother. And so it's a little bit not, it's not tzniistic for a single man to be the one dealing with picking up and dropping off the kids if it's going to be married women coming. That's the Mishnah show in Kedushin. Okay. Now again, the language of the Mishnah is Layimad Adam Revek Seifrim. That's someone that's single. The implication being, if he's married, So then it's not a concern. There's obviously it's still even a married person has to be about tznius, but in terms of irurim and impure thoughts and so on, the Yetzer Hara, we're not as concerned with a married man. But again, so that's what the Mishnah says. Now, if you take a look at Maramaka number 2, there's a Yerushalmi, also Maseches Kedushin, on that Mishnah, and the Yerushalmi brings down a brisa teaching of Rebbe Lazar. So the Yerushalmi says as follows: Tani, we have a following brisa that Rebbe Lazar said, Af misha yesh le'isha yibani. Even if a person is married, even has children, so he has a family, he's not single, the einam imay b'aisei makim, but the situation is that his wife and his children, let's say, are not in that city that he's teaching. So he happens, so his wife and kids and so on, his family is in some other city, and he's happy, for Parnas and so on. He's teaching in a cheder outside of his city. Lo yom l'seifrim, that's also something that's inappropriate. So says Rebbe Lazar, not only should he be single, but even his wife should be in the same city as he's teaching. And that's what it says in the brisa that the Yerushalmi quotes. Now, when you just see this face value of the Yerushalmi, it would sound like it's a machlokes, which happens all the time. So the Mishnah has an opinion that's recorded, and there's a brisa that brings down a dissenting view. The dissenting view could be more strict and more lenient. So in this case, that's probably what you would think. And as the Mishnah says that the issue is a person that's single shouldn't be the one that the cheder is in his house, if he's a single person. But it sounds like if he's married, wherever his wife is, it's not a problem as long as he's married. Comes the brisa with the opinion of Rebbe Lazar, he's more strict. And he says, no. Even if he's married, it's not good enough. The wife has to be in the same city as he is when he's teaching. That's what you would think. It's a machlokes. But what's interesting is that in the Rambam understood that this is not a machlokes at all. There's two separate halachas that are being explained over here. The Mishnah is describing one halacha in a certain way, and Rebbe Lazar in the brisa is coming to tell us a different halacha. So I'll explain. Take a look at Maramaka number 3. We know the Rambam is always very meticulous with how he records things, but it's also, you always have to pay attention where in his farm is he recording it. So in Maramaka number 3, the Rambam quotes the halacha of the Mishnah, and the Rambam places the halacha of the Mishnah in Hilchos Talmud Torah, in the laws of Torah learning, the laws of learning yourself, the laws of teaching, the laws of education. And the Rambam says as follows: Mi she'ein lo isha, someone that's not married, lo yilmud tinokos, should not be the one in charge. He should not be the only person teaching young children. Because of the mothers that will come to drop off and pick up the kids. So it's a lack of tznius if he's a single man. That's the Rambam. That's basically the Mishnah in Kedushin. The Rambam is recording this. But the Rambam is recording this where? In Hilchos Talmud Torah. Okay. Maramaka number 4. Elsewhere, all the way like the other end of Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Yisur Bia, that's in the context, the Rambam is talking about over there, the halachas of tznius. Nothing with Torah, just the general halachas of tznius, of men and women, of how we're supposed to relate with each other. And over here, the Rambam quotes the opinion of Rebbe Lazar. Okay? So the Rambam says like this: Mi she'ein le'isha, first starts off the same. A person that's not married, lo yilmud tinokos, should not be, the cheder Rebbe should not be the one, the sole educator in the yeshiva for little kids. Again, the same language as he said before. Because the mothers, it's a little bit more lengthy over here. The mothers will come with their children to the yeshiva. The nimsim iskar b'noshim, and there's a little bit too much interaction, or might be, between this single person and the mothers. Now, then the Rambam goes on to say, and says the Rambam now, not saying that his wife literally has to be in the schoolhouse when he's teaching, but if she's at home and he's teaching in that vicinity, in that city, that's good enough. In other words, what the Rambam over here in Hilchos Yisur Bia is telling us is not just that he has to be married. What Rambam is saying is that he has to be married. She doesn't have to be mamish in the schoolhouse. In other words, but she has to be within the city, within the location. In other words, the Rambam over here is recording the halacha of Rebbe Lazar in the brisa. So we have a little bit of a contradiction over here. In Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Rambam quoted the halacha of the Mishnah, which is very simple and straightforward. If he's single, it's a problem. In Hilchos Yisur Bia, the Rambam is telling us, not just single, the wife has to be in the same city. She doesn't have to be mamish in the same building, but definitely in the same area. So which one is it? So the answer is the answer is basically rooted in where these halachas are recorded. The first halacha the Rambam mentioned, the halacha of the Mishnah, simple. If he's married, it's okay no matter where the wife is, as long as he's not single. That the Rambam recorded in Hilchos Talmud Torah, which means that there's two separate, I guess, levels of sensitivity that we're having over here. In Hilchos Talmud Torah, that's the laws of what is absolutely necessary in terms of the system of education. The halachas of Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah demands certain sensitivities and so on. In Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Rambam is telling us the qualification in the halachas of learning and teaching is that the educator, the malamed, the mechanech over here in the Beis HaSefer, should not be single. But if he's married, even then, even wherever his wife is, that's not a problem. But that's in terms of Hilchos Talmud Torah. So, for example, if the city, does the city, in terms of their responsibility of setting up a proper yeshiva, do they have to spend extra money on hiring someone who's married and his wife is in the city? That we say no. Hilchos Talmud Torah, in terms of their responsibility of setting up a yeshiva system, as long as he's married, wherever his wife is, that's fine. And if some teachers are, if some people are complaining, his wife is far away, we should hire someone whose wife is here. That's already beyond the letter of the law in terms of Hilchos Talmud Torah, what needs to be. But then there's something else. Then there's the private Hilchos Tznius that every single person has to sort of be sensitive to within himself. There's the responsibility of the community to set up a proper yeshiva system. And in that system, so there's rules and regulations. How many kids per class? How many teachers per grade? These are systems. These are structures in place. And part of that is what type of person is allowed to be, in charge of running the cheder. So that the halach is he has to be married. Okay, that's it. But then we're moving on to a different halacha, which is forget community responsibility. Now we're talking about within the person himself. The tznius to avoid any things that are not 100% holy within himself. What is a person's own personal responsibility? That's where Hilchos Yisur Rabiyah come in. And Hilchos Yisur Rabiyah is not talking about the responsibility of the community to set up a proper yeshiva system. Over there, it's talking about every private person within themselves. What should their personal standard of kedusha be? And over there, the Rambam is saying, on a personal level, the standard of kedusha for a person should be, if he's going to be a mechanech by a cheder for small kids, his personal standard should be that his wife should be in the city. If he doesn't hold himself by such a standard, which is inappropriate for him personally, the yeshiva is not doing anything wrong. Because again, Hilchos Talmud Torah is setting up the yeshiva system. And the yeshiva system has its basic standard. And once the person is married, the yeshiva system is officially off the hook. They're doing everything technically fine. Now you want to move on to his personal obligation of going the extra mile in Inyane Kedusha. Says the Rambam, in his personal life and his personal obligation to be as holy as possible, he should be makbid, not only that he's married, but that his wife is in the city. But if he's not makbid on that, he's going against something, a personal halacha, but that's not something the yeshiva should be held responsible for. And this is how the Rambam viewed the Mishnah in Kedushin versus the Brisa that's recorded in Yerushalmi. They're not disagreeing with each other. The Mishnah is telling us something in terms of the halachas of Talmud Torah. That part of the halacha of Talmud Torah, which is what the yeshiva system should look like, the standard that the yeshiva should have in terms of community that they're responsible to upkeep is what? Is that he's married. Comes Rabbi Lazar in the Brisa that says, true, that in terms of his personal standard of kedusha for tznius on his own, personally, every individual person should have a higher standard than that for himself, and not only should he be married, but his wife should be in the city as well. That's what you see in the Rambam. Okay, that's the halacha. Fine, but now we have to investigate this a little bit on a deeper level. As I said, from the Zohar Kadosh, everything in halacha is being motivated by something practical, but also being motivated by something more esoteric. So let's focus in on the halacha in Talmud Torah. The Rambam, again, based on what the Rambam understood, the Mishnah versus this Brisa of the Yerushalmi, it comes out that a part of the halacha of how Torah should be given over to the next generation, it should be done by someone who is part of a couple, of a husband and wife. Now the truth is, in a certain sense, in a certain sense, this is reflective of what I said in the beginning, which is the basic idea of how Torah was always supposed to be given over, which is parent to child. We know that Chazal tells Vishinantam Levenecha, Benecha Elu Talmidecha, right? That a person's students is on some level considered to be their children. So, in a certain sense, if we're thinking about it, a little bit of a, beyond literal terms, this halacha that we have in place, which is that as children are being educated by the Rebbe in the Cheder, in Hilchas Talmud Torah, as far as the halachas of how Torah is supposed to be given over is concerned, part of that halacha is that he should not be someone that's single, he should be married. What this is reflective of is that Torah, to be given over to children, it should be given over from a father-mother system. A father-mother system gives Torah over to their children. And so even though we're not talking about literally biological children to a father and mother, these kids in a classroom and not related biologically to the Rebbe and to his wife, but again, the fact that that students are considered to be your children, what's being conveyed over here is this idea that there's something about Talmud Torah, there's something about Torah, something about Yidishkeit, that Yidishkeit in its purest form is something that's given over not just from a Rebbe to a student, or even just from a father to a son, a father-mother to a son, a father-mother to a child. And that's what's going on over here. So even though, again, practically speaking, the halachic motivation for this is tznius, is that a single person, we're concerned that it might not be so tzniistic if the mothers drop off the kids constantly every day. But that's in terms of the halachic motivation. The more pnimistic motivation is that in Talmud Torah we want Torah to be given over with this family dynamic of husband and wife, a father-mother partnership, then together at some level giving over Yiddishkeit in that way. So that's what we're going to be investigating now for the next few minutes. What does that mean? What does that tell us about Yiddishkeit? What is so special? What does that relationship between father and mother mean in terms of the Mesiras HaTorah, in terms of giving over Yiddishkeit to the next generation? Why is it necessary for it to be given over with that mindset of a father and mother, as opposed to just a Rebbe educating kids? So that's what we're going to do. You follow? Everyone's good so far? Okay. All right, so take a look at Marmukah number 5. Now we're going to just dive in, okay? We're just going to dive in to particular Rav Tzaddik. We're going to see where Rav Tzaddik takes us. Okay. Rav Tzaddik is going to first define for us over here. This is in Dover Tzaddik. It's the first page, the first piece in Sefer Dover Tzaddik. Okay, so Rav Tzaddik is going to be defining for us what does, again, everything in the world is all multi-layered. So in this world, there's such a thing as a father and a mother. Everything has parents, right? But what does it mean in Pnimis? What does a father and mother mean in Pnimis? So take a look at what he says in Marmukah number 5. Bereish Paraketz Mavarchim. First he quotes a Gemara. There's a Gemara in Brachas and Daf Lamed Hey Beis. It's a fantastic Gemara. The Gemara is quoting Psukim. There's a number of Psukim in Mishlei and so on that talk about always listening to the ethics of your father and the Torah of your mother, father and mother. So the Gemara says like this: Aviv Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Imai Knesset Yisrael. So the Gemara says that the term father and mother doesn't always just mean physically father and mother. Father is a reference, the root Hakadosh Baruch Hu could be called a father, and Knesset Yisrael could be called a mother. What does that mean? So Tzaddik explains. V'yidu. So he explains. Then we know. Ki chelak Hashem Amai. We know the pasuk says that what is a Jew? What is a Jew? In its very essence, right? So we know that when it comes to Shavuos, the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us the Torah, but you have to have the Jewish people to receive the Torah. So what is the defining factor of a Jew? So we know that Chazal already tell us that every single Jew deep down, this is true with all reality, but by a Jewish person it's particularly pronounced, that every single Yid is a chelak elokami malman, which is a piece of the divine presence. There's an aspect of godliness that's enlivening, that's the heart of a Jew, that's the very essence of who we are, is a piece of the divine. V'yidua, so it says Rav Tzaddik, ki chelak Hashem amai, that the portion of Hashem is His people. Shenefashos Yisrael im chelak elokah. We know that the soul of a Jew, deep down, its essence is a piece of the divine. Ukmashakasav, as the pasuk says, Ani Hashem, Hashaychen itam. I am Hashem, and I dwell with them. With them doesn't just mean around them, amongst them, it means within them. Hu chelek alekam mamish. This is the piece of the Rebbeinu Shalom Kiviyachol. Hashoichin bekerev kloyes v'leiv nefashos Yisrael, that resides and is ultimately the root of our kidneys and our instincts and the heart of a Jew, and the very essence of who we are is a piece of the divine presence. V'onikra shchina b'kol makom. And says Rav Tzaddik, you should know a klal. Whenever you find in Chazal the word shchina, which means the divine presence, it's always a reference to Hashem, the shchina. But sometimes we call Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and sometimes we call Hashem the shchina. What's the difference between those two terms? So it says for Tzaddik, the word shchina is a description of that aspect of Hashem, Kiviyachol, that resides within the Jewish people. Kumasha Amru, as the Gemara tells us, Go Bavel, for example, Gemara says, when the Jewish people are exiled to Bavel, Shchina Iman, the divine presence is with them. So what does it mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem is with us. What do it mean, Shchina? Shchina is always a word that's used to describe Hashem whenever He's not in His proper place, or whenever He's not, not necessarily a bad place, but whenever you're describing the Rebbeinu Shalom's presence in our world, in our finite, small, structured, time-based world, whenever the Rebbeinu Shalom is being described within our domain, it's always with the word Shechina. It's with the word Shechina, because that's what the Shechina means. The Shechina means Hashem's presence as He resides within us. He's going to explain further. Lefishu as galos Hashem Yisparach Hashoichin b'toich b'nei Yisrael u'b'kirbim lo'olam, because that's what the Shechina means. The Shechina means the Rebbeinu Shalom's reality as He exists within the heart of the Jewish people forever. And he quotes another piece of Chazal, and the way he teaches it is most fantastic. Chazal say, "In the olam leizaz Shechina mikaisel marav." Right? We know, for example, Chazal say that the Shechina never left the kaisel, right? The Western wall. The Rebbeinu Shalom is always there. The Shechina is always there. So it doesn't. So first of all, so it says Rav Tzaddik, again, on a simple level, means that place on earth is a place that's pulsating with God's presence more than other places, and that's true. But it says Rav Tzaddik, but the word Shechina, again, on a deeper level, the Shechina always is a reference to the divine presence in the Jewish heart, which means that when we talk about that place that's called a kaisel, for example, it's not just that physical place. That place, you have to see it as a reflection of some aspect of the Jewish soul, which is called a kaisel. And the Shechina is the Shechina is by the kaisel. So what does it mean, the kaisel within the soul, right? Because that place that's called a physical kaisel, that's a real place, and the divine presence is there. But it's just a reflection of some aspect of the Jewish soul that's called the kaisel, that the Shechina is there. Because that's what the Shechina means. The Shechina really, in its truest terminology, means Hashem's presence as it resides in the Jewish soul. And so we talk about the Shechina by the kaisel, that just must mean another reference point to the Jewish soul that has the Shechina within it. So what does it mean, the kaisel in the soul? So he says, Ratzalomer, the kaisel samach l'shkia. First of all, it's the western wall, right? West is when that's where the sun sets. So the kaisel automatically is going to be referencing a part of the human experience which is far from sunrise, much more inclined to darkness. V'lifnais erev, eis choshech, it's a time of darkness, a time of sunset. And even at that time, Hashchina leizaz. The Shechina does not leave a Jew even when they're holding by a kaisel maravi, when they're holding by a place of where it's the western wall of their lives. He says, "Ki nefashes kol Yisrael achuzim ukshurim k'v'shashelas kiyidua," because every single Jew is bound up to God's presence. And so the kaisel maravi means, Rav Tzaddik goes on to explain. I didn't bring this down because it got a little complicated. But Rav Tzaddik goes on to say that a kaisel, what's a kaisel is a wall that you lean on, a wall that you can support yourself on. It says Rav Tzaddik, the kaisel maravi means that even when a person finds themselves in a ma'irav, in a western, situation where the sun is setting, and still they have the strength to be able to rely on something, to lean on something, and say, everything else is falling apart, but at least this I have. It's like what the pasuk says, like Chazal say, when Shlomo HaMelech, there's a whole mysterious episode that Shlomo HaMelech was actually exiled from his kingdom. He was replaced. It's a whole crazy ma'aseh in Chazal. But Chazal said that he was in exile, and all he had was his walking stick and a little bucket. That's all he had from his entire malchus. And he said, Shiftecha mishantecha, right? All I have is a little walking stick and a bucket. Hey, Nachamuni, I'm in complete comfort. The Rebbeinu Shalom is taking care of me. That was his Kaisel Maravi. His Kaisel Maravi was everything else in his life fell apart, but at least something he's able to hold on to. So it's just like, where does a Jew get the strength to be able to, that all you have is a Kaisel Maravi and you could be satisfied. And you could say Kabbalah Tim, you could thank Hashem and be happy, even when everything falls apart, and all you have left is just a walking stick. And still, somehow, you feel supported by that. That's because the Shekhinah never left the Kaisel Maravi. That's what it means. The Shekhinah never leaving the Kaisel Maravi means that part of the soul, which is coming, which is saturated with, which is God Himself, Kaviyachol, that's what gives, that's your ultimate support. And everything in life that we could physically, that we can rely on, when everything else falls apart, it might seem like it's a walking stick, but it's not. It's just an expression of the Shekhinah in your life. And that's what ultimately gives a Jew a sense of footing, a sense of a ground under your feet, is the fact that the Shekhinah is what's holding up my Kaisel Maravi. And so whatever your Kaisel Maravi is, again, for Shalom Melech it was his walking stick, for other people it's something else. But whatever your Kaisel Maravi is, you should know that really that's just an expression of the Shekhinah in your life. So that's what Shekhinah means. So the Shekhinah means the Rabbanu Shalom, but the Rabbanu Shalom as he fits, as he constricted himself to be your heart and to be your Kaisel Maravi. That's what the Shekhinah means. Vahain. So Tzaddik says that that's all the Shekhinah. Then there's another term, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So obviously there's only one God, Shema Yisrael Shema Shem Echad, right? But there are multiple aspects of God's presence. So there's one level of God's presence which as he's able to be experienced by us. How is he experienced by us? So sometimes it's the Kaisel Maravi, sometimes it's with bigger things, but the Shekhinah means an aspect of godliness that we're able to experience. And then you have an aspect of godliness which is called HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu mean? God in his infinite place, where the Rebbeinu Shalom is completely unknown and completely beyond any way to any conceptualization. Take a look. So the next paragraph, Tzaddik is Vahainu. Ki be'emes, the truth is, etzem ar Hashem. This is all the Shekhinah. But when you want to define exactly the essence of God's light, and who the Rebbeinu Shalom is in his essence, in terms of Kiviyachol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it's Gadol Ma'od. That's very, very great. V'yefshel liyas musig l'lei b'nei adam klal. And the Rebbeinu Shalom in his without constricting himself as the Shekhinah, the Rebbeinu Shalom is impossible to be masik, to understand and to relate to. As the pasuk says, Ki lo yirani adam v'chai, that no human being can see me and live. V'zet toyer, and this description of the Rebbeinu Shalom, when he's not being constricted, or that side of him that's not constricted, Kiviyachol, to be experienced as the Shekhinah, that's called HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's called HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? The blessed, the Holy One, blessed is He. So he says, Hayras Kedusha, the word HaKadosh, or Kedusha, B'kol Makom means Havdalah. Kaddish means, literally, the word Kaddish means something that's separate, something that's unknown, something that's beyond. Shu Nivdal Miviyadam, which is beyond the human being. V'hainu Ar Hashem Yisbarach Hanivdal Milibis B'nei Yisrael. This is the side of Hashem's light, which is not able to be, which is not constricted to a Jewish heart. It's not the Kaisel, it's not the Shekhinah. We're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So fine. So now you have these two Kiviyachol, these two expressions of Hashem's light. You have Kiviyachol, Hashem's light in its more purest form, which is unknowable. That's called the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then you have Kiviyachol, the Rebbeinu Shalom's light, as he's willing to constrict himself to make himself known and experienced by us. It says Tzaddik, so that's how the Rebbeinu Shalom made the system. But the Rebbeinu Shalom is not satisfied with that. But what is the purpose of our lives? What's the purpose of mitzvahs? So this is what basic Yidishkeit is. It says Tzaddik, the purpose of Yidishkeit is l'shem yichud k'tshevrichu shchinte. What does it mean? L'shem yichud k'tshevrichu shchinte. That's right. We say before you do a mitzvah, I'm doing this mitzvah to unify HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah, which means that there is, says Tzaddik, the way to think of it is that whatever the Shekhinah is in your life, what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants of you is to develop that Shekhinah, to grow that Shekhinah, to bring more of the unknown light of Hashem into your life, to expand your ability to perceive Him. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants the Shekhinah to grow. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants more of himself to be known and to be perceived. Take a look at how Ritzadik puts it. He says like this: "Ufi sheratza Hashem yisbarach." So what is the Ratzon of Hashem? She'asigo hanevroim gam kin mi'ayra. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to understand more, to perceive more. That whatever level of the Shechina is in your life, that the Rebbeinu Shalom created for you when you were, just as is, your purpose in Avodas Hashem is to expand that Shechina, is to bring more to bring more of that unknown light into your known, to become known, to expand the territory of the Shechina. That's the idea. To bring together more and more HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Shechina. Then more and more, as you grow in your Yidishkeit and your mitzvahs and your learning and davening, v'chulu, then all of a sudden, what was until now HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now actually becomes more Shechina. And then there's more HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which becomes more Shechina. And there's this constant cycle of what was until now unknown, becoming known. And then what was not even unknown, it was didn't know existed, becomes unknown. And then that becomes known. And there's this constant fueling, this constant fusion between what was until now HaKadosh Baruch Hu, becomes the Shechina, and then there's a deeper level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's how the cycle goes. And that is the purpose of Yiddish. That's every mitzvah that we do is for that purpose. Ritzadik explains. Again, so Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to understand, to be masig, to experience His light on a level that's beyond just the status that He created us with. So tzimtzim yisbarach harasai shetiyah mugbelas mitzvunsemes. And the Rebbeinu Shalom therefore created this process, this inyan that's called the Shechina, which is a constricted light of Hashem Yisbarach. Not in a strong, overwhelming way. That's the light of the Shechina. B'nei Yisrael, in the hearts of every Jew. Ukinin ha'aim. Now there goes back to talk about father and mother. Ukinin ha'aim ha'megadebelas es b'noah. Kach gidol ha'chaim ha'nitzchim shebenefashis b'nei Yisrael or ha'shleichin bam. Says Ritzadik. When we talk about father and mother in Chazal, in a deeper sense, it is also a reference, it's a synonymous terminology between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. So which means that, let's go back to the first line in the beginning of Maramaka number 5, right? So we quoted the Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara said, Aviv is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Imai is Knesset Yisrael. And so in other words, father means a reference to what? To HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to that light of Hashem which is unknown, beyond your kalim, beyond your heart to perceive at the present moment. And the mother means what? The light of Hashem as it resides in your heart, which is understood, which is relatable. This is why, again, in the classic sense, when children that are very, very little, for sure, things might change as they get older, whatever, but children that are very, very little feel closer to their mothers than they do their fathers. That's the nature. Even the pasuk says that, kaberis avicha v'esimecha, right? Because it's more natural for a child to feel a little bit more comfortable with the mother than it is with the father. So why is that? Because on a deeper level, that's not. We understand why that is practically, because the mother's taking care of the kid at home, and the mother is more nurturing by nature than the father. The father is also taking care of everything, but a little bit more from a distance, right? But in Pnimius, this is reflective of this deeper truth, which is that every father-mother relationship is on some level a reflection of these two sides of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Shechina. And the Shechina is that light of Hashem that resides within your heart, that is your Kaisel Maravi. That's a nechama, that's a comfort, that's a motherly experience. Whereas a father, it's ultimately the fuel, where it's the source where the Shechina is coming from as well. It's all coming from that light that exists in its place, so to speak, which is unknown. But Lamais, it's unknown, and because of that, that's called the father. So now Ritzadik goes on to say, V'hine, next paragraph, Kol Maisa HaMitzvahs. Whenever you do a mitzvah, again, the purpose of mitzvahs is what? Is to bring together, to fuse together the light of the father with the light of the mother. The whole purpose of mitzvahs is what? Is to expand the territory of the Shechina, to bring more HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the system, expanding the Shechina to become greater. And v'chulu, the cycle continues. Every mitzvah, every davening, every learning, it's all about that. But says Ritzadik, therefore, though, in order for a mitzvah to be truly activated in its truest form, in its truest sense, it's dependent on the person doing a mitzvah with the realization that that it's not me. See, when a person does a mitzvah, if they're thinking, like that's a person putting on tefillin or lighting Shavuos candles, whatever the mitzvah is, if they're thinking, this is mamash me, I am deciding to take this physical pure tefillin and to wrap it on my arm. Why am I doing this? I don't know. Peer pressure. I'm doing this because I don't want to go to hell. I'm doing this maybe because I want to get rewarded in the next world with it. Whatever the motivation is. But if it's me, if I am the one that is deciding and I am the one that's performing this act, then guess what? Then that act is very human and it's very limited. And it loses its potency in terms of what a mitzvah is. What is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is an act that the Rabbanu Shalom reveals to us that's really an interaction between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. That's what a mitzvah really is. It's just that for that yichud, for that union to take place, it depends on us as human beings to create an environment that's in congruence with that yichud. To create an environment that allows that yichud to be manifest. But you're not the one doing the mitzvah. The power of the mitzvah is in truth something that's happening through you. But who are you? In a certain sense, you're passive, and you're just sort of like on the journey that the mitzvah is taking you on. You're not putting tefillin on. Tefillin is putting you on. You know what I'm saying? That it's the tefillin, for this yichud to take place, it depends on you making that decision to put on tefillin. But that decision to put on tefillin, when you make that decision, then what's happening? Something inside of me that's much deeper than I could even imagine. My kaisel marav, the shechin inside of me is uniting with its root and its source and expanding. I don't want to get in the way of that. I have to. This is the idea of having bittul, of having humility and submissiveness to mitzvahs themselves, mitzvahs that you're doing, but for them to really be defined as a true mitzvah, as a mitzvah which is about uniting this kayach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina, of ish v'ishtai, of aviv v'imai. It demands a person doing the mitzvah with a sense of humility and a sense of bittul. Take a look at what Tzaddik says. Kol ma'aseh mitzvahs, every single mitzvah that we do, hu aidei chelek chayim ha'shoichin b'sicheinu. It's really the power of the mitzvah and what's defining this act as a mitzvah, as opposed to just being another physical act that we're doing. What's really what's defining it as a mitzvah is the shechin inside of us, and that act is now defined as an act of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the light of the Shechina, uniting with each other. We're serving the Rebbeinu Shem through that, but what defines it as a mitzvah is the fact that we have a chelek l'kamim al mamash inside of us. Hainu ki tachlis hashleimus hu aisafis is galus arshem esbarach beriba yoiser murgash. The tachlis of mitzvahs is what is to perform these acts and so on to increase the known side of Hashem, to increase the power of the Shechina. That's the point. To the point of where the Shechina and that part of me, which is a divine presence, is exploding out. That's what the purpose of mitzvahs are. And that's why the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us mitzvahs. That the Rebbeinu Shalom in His infinite wisdom has determined and decided that al yadam, that through these acts, yizdakaku hanefashos v'halavavos, the human being, the Jew, will become more refined and more able to, and the Shechina inside of him and her will be able to receive more of that infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what mitzvahs are. The Yisru Hamaskim Hamavdilim, and the chitzas, the dividing lines between the Shechina and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be removed. Till that part of us that's called the Shechina, the Kaisam Ravi, will be expanded, and the Beis Hamikdash will be fully rebuilt within ourselves. Till a point where there's another brick in that Beis Hamikdash, and another element of the Shechina is more built in your life. With every single mitzvah that we do, and so on and so forth. And this is what's happening over here. It's the kaviyachal aviv v'imai being united in order to produce what? To produce an experience of godliness. That's what's going on over here. Now, let's go back to how we started. Now that we have this clear definition of what Yidishkeit is, right, and what the purpose of Yidishkeit is, So we started in the beginning with a halacha in Hilchos Talmud Torah. The Rambam told us is that even in halacha lemaisa, the way the yeshiva system is set up in halacha, is that the way Yidishkeit has to be given over is that what? It's between a husband and wife, between these two forces of masculine and feminine, right? And them together are giving over Yidishkeit to children. That's the way it is. That picture is exactly everything we're talking about. Because what does it mean? What does it mean to perform mitzvahs like a child? Because again, we're moving beyond just that actual scene of kids in yeshiva. We're talking about what this tells us about Yiddishkeit b'chlal. Take a look at the final Maramakim number 6. This is from our tzaddik in Sefer L'kutim Amarim. So he quotes the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara tells us on Daf Gimel Mebeis, "Shakadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev b'Kol Yom." Listen to the words. Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev b'Kol Yom. Hakadosh Baruch Hu sits every single day. Sitting, by the way, is also a code word, always a code word in Chazal for the Shechina. The Shechina means to reside, it means to lower. When you're standing, it means you're tall. When you sit, all of a sudden you get lower. So the Shechina, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sitting, what does that mean? Like, Hashem is not physical. So what does it mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu sits? The answer is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sitting means that there's a yichud taking place. That what was until now unknown, what was until now called HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is all of a sudden residing. It's all of a sudden lowering. It's all of a sudden becoming an increased level of Shechina, which is what every mitzvah is supposed to be doing. So the Gemara is telling us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev b'Kol Yom. The Rabbanan Shalom sits. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sits every single day. Umalami Torah l'Tinokei Shel Beis Rabim, and teaches Torah to school children. That's what the Gemara says it in Gan Eden. The Rabbanan Shalom teaches school children. But this is a description. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sitting and teaching school children, which means, says Rav Tzaddik, this is a scene that defines for us how mitzvahs have to be performed. Tinokei Shel Beis Rabim, what is the definition of learning Torah like a school child? So it says Rav Tzaddik, Heim hanikroyim hamakirim v'yodim she'en lo mi'atzmam rak mashu mikabim rabim. See, kids can be in the playground. You know what I'm saying? Kids can be all full of themselves, macho. You'll have the kid that's the head of the playground. But the nature of children is, when they're sitting in class, is that they know that they don't have any control. They're not in control. They don't have any information. All they know is from what their Rebbe tells them. See, not so with an older kid, right? An older kid, they have this, they can read, they can study on their own. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, maybe the Rebbe comes and guides them, but they're doing it on their own. Mamish, school children, little kids, can't learn on their own. All they have is what they receive. So what does it mean? So let's go back to that image that the Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah. Of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev and teaching Tinokei Shel Beis Rabim. Says Rav Tzaddik, that's summing up what Yiddishkeit is. If you want your mitzvahs, your Torah, your davening, your mitzvahs to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev, the Rabbanan Shalom sitting, in other words, this fusion between Aviv v'Imai, this fusion between Ish v'Ishtai, this fusion between the unknown to the known, expanding the domain of one's Shechina, which is really what a mitzvah is, then you can't get in the way. Then you can't think of the mitzvah as something that you're in control of. If you see yourself in terms of your avodas Hashem, of your mitzvahs, as a school child, which is that it's not me. Of course, I have to be the one to put on tefillin, but I recognize that when I put on tefillin, it's not me. I'm just allowing this reality to happen through me. Just like a kid in class, the kid knows, I'm not in control, this is not me, I'm just going to repeat what my Rebbe says. When a person has the mindset of Tinokei Shel Beis Rabim in yeshiva, in terms of of Yiddishkeit, if you look at Yiddishkeit in that way, then what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev. Then that mitzvah is now redefined, instead of it being just a human act that you'll get reward for, but now becomes an act that's really happening between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. It's really something that's happening between Aviv v'Imai. It's happening between Ish v'Ishtai. And this is the pnimius of this halacha. That's why in Hilchos Talmud Torah it's defined for us. That Hilchos Talmud Torah dictates that children have to be taught in yeshiva by dafka someone who's not just a single person on his own. It's with a partnership of him and his wife. Because this structure of what? Of children being taught in yeshiva by a couple, between a husband and wife, in other words, and symbolically speaking, the children in yeshiva being the sort of the children of this couple, what's being conveyed over here is an image. This is the branding of what Yiddishkeit is, and it's always like this, that you always have to get it right in the beginning. You know what I'm saying? Like like the Gemara says that Girsa Diankis, if you misunderstood something when you're little, it's going to take a long time to get that out of your head. So right away, when kids are little, and we're giving over Yiddishkeit, we want to give it over with this package. Where what? It's in this way, where the purpose of the mitzvah is really about uniting those forces that's called father and mother. Uniting those forces, which is called masculine and feminine. Unite those forces, which are called husband and wife. And the way to unite those forces is through the child. It's through performing mitzvahs with a childlike mentality. When you perform mitzvahs as a childlike mentality, then the mitzvah itself is unifying those forces that's called father and mother. So that's seen in Hilchos Talmud Torah, which defines for us what this structure should look like in a cheder, which is a couple united on some level and educating children. That's all of Yiddishkeit. That's all of Yiddishkeit, and that's why that's what's motivating this halacha in terms of pnimius. And so this redefines for us what Yiddishkeit is about. Again, it's about performing mitzvahs, but like in a couple of days from now, we're going to stand and we're going to say Na'aseh V'Nishma, whether we realize it or not, right? So we're going to say Na'aseh V'Nishma. What does Na'aseh V'Nishma mean? Everyone asks, I will do and I will hear. So how could you do before you hear about it? The answer is, of course, you can't do before you hear about it. I can't do mitzvahs unless I know what they are. But what's being conveyed by Na'aseh V'Nishma is that even when I'm doing it, it's not me. It's Na'aseh V'Nishma. There's a part of me which is like in control. That's the Nishma part. But in terms of the mitzvahs, it's Na'aseh. I'll do it. It's just happening. It's the Jewish people establishing themselves for all time with their right mindset of like, we are school children when it comes to mitzvahs. Of course, it's me. I have to make the right decisions to do the mitzvah. But once I make that decision to put on the tefillin, to light the Shabbos candle, to open the sefer, to open the tefillin, whatever the case may be, then I step back and I'm just repeating what my Rebbe says. I'm just allowing this to happen, and it's that union of other the imay, of ish v'ishtai, of the cheder Rebbe with his wife. That's really what Yiddishkeit's about. And you need the children, the school children mentality to allow that yichud to take place, and that's Na'aseh V'Nishma. That's what Shavuos says. No. So Hashem should help us. We should appreciate that gift that the Hashem gave us, mamish, a piece of Himself, and He made us. It might sound like this whole concept takes away from our, from our sense of like control or whatever. But maybe that's a good thing. But the truth is, I think it's very empowering, because all of a sudden, like if it's really all you, then how much power do you really have then? But if I am acting as in a childlike way, I'm facilitating this union and this yichud to take place between other the imay, and you can't have other the imay without a child, right? That's just the way it is. So the child's there to function, to allow that yichud to take place. Then that yichud is much bigger than anything the kid on his own could have done. So that's I think that's a much more powerful Yiddishkeit than anything else. And that's why the Rabban Shalom, when he heard us say Na'aseh V'Nishma, Hashem said, "Wow, hu migil raz elabonai, that raz shemalach yashar misham shembai." That secret, that way of thinking, Malachim have that mentality. Why? Because Malachim don't have an ego like that. Malachim are just messengers. A Malach, of course, sees himself as just a conduit for something bigger acting through him. And that's exactly what Na'aseh V'Nishma is saying. But the greatness of a human being, the greatness of a Jew over a Malach, is that a Malach, the bittul, the nullification, the transparency of a Malach isn't creating any deep unity. Rabban Shalom wants to do something, it goes through a Malach. It's just part of it, it's just a cog. But by the Jewish people, when we are consciously, when we make ourselves transparent for the Rebbeinu Shalom, then something much greater is actually happening through us, and that's a powerful thing. That's a powerful thing. Hashem should bless us. To stand by our Sinai, receive the Torah, Na'aseh V'Nishma, know what we're doing, and let go of all our power. And that will be very powerful. Shkoyach.